Welcome to Line Change, a podcast about hockey, social issues, and change makers in the game we love. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy. Welcome to another episode of Line Change. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy, and we're here again to talk about hockey, social issues, and how the two intersect. Today, a very interesting conversation for me, not one that I ever anticipated having in the hockey world. I've always been an animal lover growing up on a farm, and seeing those animals, I never thought a single thing about the ethical side of it. I was as in the dark as anyone else on this topic. Growing up about an hour from the Detroit border, I was a faithful Red Wings fan, and every spring I was always excited to see the first octopus thrown on the ice. Watching Al Sabodka, the Zamboni driver, famously step on the ice each time and swing that octopus around gave me an incredible feeling because I knew that meant my Detroit Red Wings had scored a goal. I grew up in the era, of course, of people like Steve Yzerman and Nick Lidstrom, and watched 4 Stanley Cups being raised in Detroit. And so we saw a lot of octopus, but I never thought of that animal. I never thought of the ethical decision to throw an animal onto the ice. Of course, the legend of the octopus goes as such. In 1952, the Detroit Red Wings were in the Stanley Cup playoffs. At the time, it only took 2 best-of-7 series to win the cup. The octopus then represented the 8 legs and 8 wins needed to win the Stanley Cup. However, local business owner Jerry Cusimano saw an opportunity. He began the practice on April 15th, 1952, of throwing an octopus on the ice when the Detroit Red Wings scored. Now, this happened at Olympia Stadium, and that year, the Detroit Red Wings swept both the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens to win the Stanley Cup in only 8 games. So I decided to have a conversation with PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. It's a major group across the world that has advocated for animal rights and ethical treatment of animals in all things, from cosmetics to sports. Today, I'm welcoming Ashley Byrne, a campaign specialist for PETA, who's here to talk about sports and animals and how the intersection of animals in sports should impact our thoughts. Maybe you could start by just discussing what PETA does globally and kind of how PETA has become involved in some issues related to sport.
Sure. Well, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, we are the largest animal rights organization in the world. In addition to our main organization based here in the US, we have international entities all over the world. And our mission statement is that animals are not ours to use. They're not here for us to eat, to wear, to use for entertainment, or to exploit in any way. They're individuals who exist for their own purposes, and they have their own needs, and they have the ability to feel pain and fear and to suffer. And so, and we shouldn't cause them needless suffering. And so to that end, PETA works to prevent and reduce, suffering, animal suffering and cruelty to animals in a very wide variety of ways. From actual hands-on animal rescue here in the US or overseas, where, for instance, for months now, we've had rescuers on the ground in Turkey rescuing animals out of the buildings that were demolished by the recent earthquakes there. We've had people on the ground in Ukraine helping just with all sorts of animal emergencies that they've been facing since the war began. But we also address these things through our campaigns. And so that's very much about education and about Ideally changing people's behavior so that they're not doing things that cause animals to suffer in the first place, whether that involves, what people are eating, what they're wearing, the type of entertainment that they're, going to see or engaging in. And I think that's where sports comes into it a lot of the time, because there are a lot of things that we've done over the years, whether you're talking about live mascots or actually involving animals, in so-called sporting events like horse racing, where the animals are suffering, and people historically didn't really think about that, but it's really coming to the forefront now.
Yeah, I think that that's something that people really haven't discussed is how we've taken these living creatures. We all love our own pets, our cats and dogs, and our, the things that are closest to us. But as soon as it gets outside of our realm, we look at it as just entertainment's sake, and we forget about that connection that those are living beings that if they were in our own home with us, we would really love them, and we would be upset if someone else was doing anything that would hurt them. But I guess there's kind of a hierarchy of animals that we look at that sometimes we don't think of. In this sake, the one I'm going to talk to you about now, alligators, in the same way that we might look at our own, the dogs and cats that are with us all the time. So the NHL
Totally.
All-Star game recently, they have tried just about everything. We've gone through the whole gimmick phase. We've seen all these different things that they're going to try from a hockey standpoint. And one of the ideas, bizarrely, in my opinion, this year had to do with alligators. And from what I kind of understand, the alligators were going to be in a pond and something, pucks would be flying over them or something along those lines. I don't even know what it was supposed to be because it seems so outrageously gimmicky, I guess, for one standpoint. And then from PETA's standpoint, I guess, unethical in a way. So maybe you can talk me through that and what messaging PETA put out there regarding this situation, because I did see that PETA released a statement about it and stayed along with this whole conversation.
Right. Which we always try to do when we see something like this come up. So yes, I mean, you make the great point that alligators are, this is not an animal that most people are familiar with in the way that we're familiar with dogs and cats. And they might not automatically inspire the same empathy in people as these animals who we're like cuddling on the couch with at home. You're probably not cuddling with an alligator. You shouldn't be cuddling with an alligator on the couch, So we really don't think of them in the same way very often. But the fact is that at the end of the day, these are beings, these are animals. They feel fear, they feel pain, they can suffer. They certainly, as any living being would, definitely suffer if they got hit with a flying hockey puck. And unlike us, they aren't choosing to be in these big, noisy environments. And that's something we find ourselves bringing up regularly. Again, whether you're talking about the use of live mascots by teams, or whether you're talking about animals, being forced to perform in a stadium in some capacity, we're choosing to be there. And, we know when we're going in, we know why we are in this giant environment filled with noise, filled with, chaos. Like we're choosing that. The animals don't choose it. They don't know what's going on. And you can imagine that that would be terrifying if you had no clue and you were just brought into this environment of absolute chaos. That would be really frightening. And the fact
Yeah.
is that it's totally unnecessary. Like when you're talking about the use of animals in these ways, it doesn't need to have. Hockey is exciting enough as it is. Like I love hockey, you just don't need to do this. And so, yeah, so when we see situations like this happening, and as you say, in this case, with this situation in particular, we come out and say, leave the animals out of it. Enjoy the game with the humans who are choosing to be there, and leave the animals in peace because they have no idea what's going on. They don't want to be there, and there's no reason why they need to be.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating issue, and of course, I'm talking about it right now because I care about hockey, and I want to make sure that everything that surrounds the game is as ethical as possible, and that we're not having these blind spots that we just overlook. And we've seen that a number of times, whether it was the All-Star game with the alligators, but there's been other historical examples. The Pittsburgh Penguins one time brought live penguins out on the ice. There's an infamous video of a minor league hockey team, the Bakersfield Condors, which play in the American Hockey League, where they brought a live condor out. And the condor, probably, as you were just mentioning, was not used to where they were, recognized they didn't belong in an arena, and went for a fly around. And what happened afterwards, I think for most people, they found it comical, but it must have been terrifying for the animal itself. And I think that's, where we're talking about this right now is that in the sports arena, we kind of overlook a lot of things. In other shows, we're going to talk about fighting and some of the violence that goes on in sport, but we're also overlooking the harm that might be caused to these animals. And, you've talked about that, using them for entertainment, like a miniature circus. We've seen other examples recently where teams bring dogs onto the ice, and it might seem really simple, but I know from being a dog owner in the past that if your dog slips on the ice, they can hurt themselves, and teams have these little puppies that they're calling their team dogs now, and all these items that have kind of become almost a social media showing. It's something for entertainment and to create content. Uh, what I don't know if there's an answer to that or to what you should do about that, but these animals obviously don't belong there, right? That's the whole idea of PETA, is to protect the well-being because they are beings. So what would you say to these teams that are utilizing these gimmicks?
I mean, yeah, I would say, first of all, if you're talking about exotic animals, if you're talking about animals being bred for the purpose of being used in this way, that's definitely a problem. Because also, like, if you put aside what's happening in the stadium, animals who are bred to be used in entertainment, they just don't have good lives. They're
Mm,
very often, they're coming from unethical breeding situations. They're usually kept in ways where they're pretty much just kind of waiting for their next gig, and so they're not really being allowed to engage in anything that's natural to them. They're trained in ways that are very cruel. Um, and then when they're not, at their prime age anymore, they're very often they're killed, or they're sold to a roadside zoo, or they're just relegated to something even more miserable. Now, in the case of, for instance, you mentioned like a team dog. I know there are teams where, they have sort of, I've seen examples of teams like bringing out um, dogs who are up for adoption, or, like um, someone in the organization will adopt a dog, and
sure. Yeah.
they'll start showing them, like, at practice with the team and stuff like that. And that's a different story, because again, these are animals with, like, that are not being used just for this purpose. They're actually engaging in a different way, and ideally not being brought out again in front of screaming crowds. But if they're just kind of coming to practice and having fun with the team when it's not a super high stress situation, that's different. That's great. Like if they have a normal, loving home and they're just getting to, like, engage with these teams in a fun, casual, non-stress way, great. But yeah, when you're talking about these other situations where,
Penguins, bringing penguins onto the ice.
exactly, yeah, bringing penguins onto the ice, not a good idea.
Mhm.
For the penguins, honestly, for anybody. I mean, and again, when you think about what the rest of their lives look like, aside from that 5 minutes on the ice, it's not a pretty picture. Or again, if you're talking about these mascots that are used for these teams, whether you're talking about like a bulldog mascot or a bull mascot. I mean,
Mhm.
again, they're not really having the lives that they deserve. And actually being in front of these screaming crowds can be a real stressor, and it's just so unnecessary. It's something that we can completely bypass. I mean, I went to the University of Colorado, and it just used to ruin the football games for me when they would bring the buffaloes out into the stadium. That was our mascot, and we had these live mascots, and they would bring them in and run them around. And I just remember thinking, like, I love this noisy environment. I love being in the middle of this just crazy crowd screaming. But I just remember it would just kind of bring it all to a halt to me. And I would think, nothing about this sits right. This just does not feel right. And I think more and more people are starting to feel that way. And so, we really hope that more of these athletic organizations will start realizing that this isn't in keeping with what their fans want. And honestly, just no one needs it. Like, there are so many other things you can do to just hype people up at these games. And as you pointed out, if you're working with a person, like in a costume or something, you're not running the risk of things going horribly wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a bizarre thing to do, but I mean, people have used my daughter loves to watch funny pet videos, and I don't even know what that is described as per se, but she likes to see animals doing funny things, and they are entertaining in a way, as long as it's, something that the animal just does that's funny and is their own little thing that they've developed.
Right.
We also, have a roadside zoo that's very close to our house that is completely sad and upsetting to visit. And there's all these things that people love animals, but when we see them in this other situation, we don't necessarily think of what could be happening. And that brings me to one of the most common places that we see animals utilized in sport, in particular in hockey. And I mentioned it off the top about growing up as a Red Wings fan and seeing the Octopus on the ice. But they've been kind of used, this bizarre tradition, as these props. And of course, there's a lot of folklore that goes along with the Detroit Red Wings portion of it. Some people say the 8 legs represented the 8 wins it took to capture a Stanley Cup in the era. Of course, there's some local marketing from a businessman that owned a store that sold Octopus at the time. But long and the short of course, is that when the Red Wings scored a goal in the playoffs and sometimes in the regular season, fans would throw Octopus onto the ice. And it's a tradition, we'll say, that's been picked up and utilized by the Nashville Predators, throwing Catfish. There was a time when a shark appeared on the ice at the San Jose game. Luckily, the Florida Panthers utilized plastic rats when they threw tens of thousands of them. But, throwing things on the ice is kind of this hockey tradition. Sometimes it's for a good purpose, when we throw a hat on the ice for a hat trick, or their teddy bear tosses have been created to throw stuffed animals onto the ice to support children that might need them for a holiday, or, that are in situations of domestic abuse or violence, and they're given to them when they're being helped out there. But the animal portion, the catfish and the octopus, I don't know. What can you I guess walk me through a little bit about what PETA's involvement has been over the years in trying to stop this hockey tradition?
Yes, absolutely. Because, as you point out, it's something that has been going on for quite a while. And we have just in every case where this has come to our attention, we have written open letters to the teams and to the fans, and asked, first of all, that there be no tolerance for people who are doing this. If someone's throwing a dead animal of any kind onto the ice, we're asking that they be ejected from the game. Because the thing is, this is just making light of the idea of cruelty to animals like that. I mean, it is very serious. Again, you have, I know there's violence in hockey, but it's different. This is, it's a very different story when you're talking about, and again, I love hockey. When you're talking about humans who are choosing to participate in, I mean, maybe you wouldn't call it violence, but in just very aggressive, in this
I
very
think we
aggressive.
would, if
I
someone
mean,
took my
yeah,
cat,
maybe.
if my cat passed away and someone threw it over the glass onto the ice to celebrate a goal, I would think that's pretty violent.
Oh
It's,
no, that I would
yeah,
call violence.
yeah.
I mean the
Well, and
actual
hockey,
like sport of hockey,
well, the
just
sport
great.
of hockey is violent as well. I think that's
Yeah,
part of
that's
the allure that people
yeah,
have fallen in love with it over the years, and something that we're talking about as well. But yeah, the animals,
yeah.
it's
But
definitely violent.
well, and I think this is kind of the point that I think whether you're talking about hockey or boxing or any of these very aggressive kind of violent sports, I think that it stops being entertainment when you like put someone in there who didn't choose to be there,
Hmm.
and then it stops being entertainment and it becomes bullying. And that includes, if you're talking about an animal, it becomes bullying, it becomes abuse, it becomes cruelty. The whole point of why why you can watch these sports and enjoy them and not feel bad about what you're seeing is that you have very consenting athletes in there engaging in this, people who train, and this is their life, this is they're
Hmm.
they're they are skilled, they are intentional, they're incredible. It's so different when you throw someone in there who never had a choice, and that
Well,
includes a death.
we have rules about that, right? We have in hockey, you can't walk up and what they call sucker punch someone. You have to
Right.
be in the fight legally if you want to be in the fight, and so
Exactly.
I get that, but well, I think one of the defenses that we would see hockey fans make that maybe don't understand coming from your standpoint or from an animal rights advocacy standpoint is that they would say the animal is already dead. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think there are a couple of things there. I mean, first of all, I think that just playing with a dead animal's body and you know making light of them in that way, it still encourages violence. It still is encouraging, kind of just trivializing the death of an animal. And, you know, I would say in particular, I mean, like all of these animals feel fear, they all feel pain, they all have the capacity to suffer. An octopus is a brilliant, sensitive, complex animal. These animals are so fascinating and so highly intelligent. I mean, I would almost say, you shouldn't be hurting or desecrating the body of any animal, but when it's an animal who's probably smarter than you are, it really adds insult to injury. But I mean, seriously, like you shouldn't be doing this at all. Um, but and it's such a waste of life. And granted, at PETA, we advocate for not eating those animals as well. We don't think you should be playing with the body of a dead fish or a dead octopus, but we also don't think you should be eating fish
Hmm.
you know or any other sea animals. But that said, regardless of where you stand on that, I think it's just important to realize that these are sensitive beings and we shouldn't be trivializing their deaths or their suffering. And they do suffer when they are killed. They do suffer when they die. Um, and so yeah, if you think about it, like you said, how you'd react if it was an animal who's more familiar, how people would react if they were throwing a dead puppy, a dead cat, a dead animal, um, who people might relate to a little more, people would be horrified.
Hmm.
And the fish, a fish and octopus, they have the same capacity to feel pain and to suffer as a dog, as a cat. So, I don't think we'd have to explain if it was a dead cat. We wouldn't have to say, well, this is why it's wrong. People would just be like, no, that's wrong. Um, there's really no difference except our cultural perception.
Yeah, it's a pretty graphic view if you want to think about the alternative of that of making it one of those quote unquote cute animals that people kind of like they think, oh, this puppy, this cat. We don't necessarily think about that with the octopus, but I'd never really even researched into an octopus that much and realized that they were an intelligent creature. I've just kind of seen them fictionalized or know them in passing. But probably my most relevant interaction with them is watching Detroit Red Wings games. So really, it gives an alternative viewpoint to that. So I appreciate you informing myself about that in particular, and everyone else. Now,
Absolutely.
to move this to a positive standpoint, I want to end on something good. There are a lot of more interesting connections. Of course, we have the mascots, as long as we keep the live animals away from them, whether it's the Pittsburgh Penguins or the San Jose Sharks. And the one that really, strikes my interest in particular is the Florida Panthers. I don't even know if the Arizona Coyotes, I guess, is another one, but the Panthers themselves were named after an endangered species with the idea of bringing awareness to that. I'm wondering, whether it's hockey or another sport, do you have a favorite animal team mascot that you really look at? I know you mentioned where you went to school, but is there anything that comes to mind like that? And what do you think about a team like the Florida Panthers utilizing their namesake to bring awareness to a species that might be endangered?
That is very cool. And I think we would love to see more of that in the future. Of that thoughtfulness and of teams thinking about how they can use these mascot, their mascots to help animals or to raise awareness. I think that's wonderful. It's an interesting question about my favorite mascots. I'm tempted to say the Fighting Irish, because that pertains to me. But that's
not animal based then.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly not. And it's not, it's honestly one that I would have to give a little more thought to. But I hope we see more of that trend in terms of instead of having, a mascot and then bringing the live animal representatives, and, just, it is something, people are so devoted to their teams. Mm-hmm. And I think it really does have great potential for getting people to pay attention to certain issues. And I have to say, on that note too, at PETA, we're fortunate to work with so many incredible athletes who have partnered with us on campaigns, about different issues pertaining to animals, whether you're talking about athletes, plant-based athletes talking about their vegan diets and how it helps their performance. Or, we've had a lot of athletes who have done campaigns with their dogs, encouraging people to spay and neuter and adopt and make sure they're not leaving their dogs outside on chains. So, I think just the passion that people have for the athletes and the teams they love, it's powerful, and it can be used for a lot of good.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole purpose of why we're having this conversation, is the idea that we can turn some of these narratives from throwing an animal onto the ice into how can we leverage the game that we all love into being something that supports more ethical decisions, animal rights, animal protections, whether it's adopting a dog, like you said, or raising funds for habitat regeneration or whatever it might be. I think there's power in sport, and that's why I'm very thankful, Ashley, that you were able to join me today. And I hope that sometime we can have another conversation and hopefully that never happens, but if something else comes up about the NHL or Hockey League and animal rights, thank you so much for joining me.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, hopefully we'll have a good story, like a good development to talk about.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Line Change. I'm Ian Kennedy, and our special guest today was Ashley Byrne from PETA. I never anticipated talking about animal rights on a hockey podcast, but here we are, and I hope that there's something that we can all take from it. The next time I see an octopus land on the ice, I know that not only will I be questioning how that octopus got smuggled into the arena, but I'll be questioning what the ethics are behind tossing, as Ashley so eloquently said, a very intelligent animal onto the ice. And I hope that we can all step back and think, how can I make a difference in this discussion and on this topic? And you can go down to your local animal shelter and donate or adopt an animal, because that's what this is all about. Not just talking about an issue abstractly, but putting it into practice in our own lives. From one animal lover to another, thanks so much for joining me. I'm Ian Kennedy, and this was A Line Change.